Hello. This is a very interesting lesson because even if you are 18 or 20 years old, this lesson deals with events that have happened during your lifetime. So, lesson 12, the Western world in the last 25, 30 years. And as you see here, the main topic of this introduction is the end of the Cold War. Let's begin with Mikhail Gorbachev. You may notice that some of the pictures that you will see in this first part of the introduction to the lesson are different from what you've seen. And that is because they come from one of the students from previous semesters who did a wonderful presentation about Mikhail Gorbachev and allowed me to use his graphics. So you'll see his name is here, and if you happen to know Christian, you can tell him that I'm still using the graphics that he designed for his presentation. So let's talk about Mikhail Gorbachev. Why is he so significant? He did what no one else had done in the Soviet Union, and he also presented ideas that no other world politician has dared to present. Within the Soviet Union, he decided, and he did it very, very consciously, and he did it because he was convinced that that was what needed to be done. He brought a total change in the Soviet Union, and he did it with three very specific programs that we see here. One of them was called perestroika. Perestroika has become a common word used all over the world, meaning restructuring, rebuilding, uprooting, and that's what he wanted to do in the Soviet Union. The second program is related to perestroika. In fact, some people say that it is one branch of perestroika, and it's called glasnost. It can be translated as public speaking. It's mainly translated as openness. And the second of his programs was a democratization program. So he wanted to make the Soviet Union more democratic in its government and in its organization. Let's analyze in a little more detail these three programs. First, we have perestroika. He wanted to restructure the Soviet Union at every level. And you can see here, economic, political, and social. And it is the social aspect that he named glasnost. So the economic and political aspects of perestroika he decided to implement, and he did. It was difficult for him because the ideology that the Soviet Union had used for decades was so ingrained in the population and in the politicians that it was going to be very difficult to change. But he did try, and he accomplished that. In the economic area, he wanted to go back to market economy, what Lenin had tried to implement during his new economic policies. He wanted to allow private property, and he wanted to start free enterprise. He encountered a strong reaction against those conservatives who wanted the Soviet Union to continue with the deep communism. But he tried that, and he began to succeed while he was trying to implement his political reforms. And his political reforms consisted of some representation by the Soviet people. He had the parliament. It was a party that was the Communist Party, but separated from the government and the state. And this was very difficult to achieve because for so many years the Communist Party had been the state, and the state had been the Communist Party. He then became the president of the Soviet Union. And that was a position different from the position of secretary of the Communist Party. As far as Glasnost was the social aspect of perestroika, and it was a new openness. It was an acceptance that people had freedom of speech and that they could express if something was not right or if they saw something that was not right. He allowed people to report problems that they saw or to organize public protests. He allowed freedom of the press, some, not total, but it was the beginning of the openness that had not existed ever since the time that Stalin took power. He was not expecting the results that he found. What he did not expect, or at least he never expressed that he had expected that, was that the Soviet republics, those republics that had been together to form the Soviet Union, began to complain about the power of the central government and began movements of nationalism. And those movements eventually caused the separation of those republics. But as this is happening, because it took a few years for this to develop, many people within the government were looking at the consequences of this openness, and they reacted against it. So eventually they organized a coup against Gorbachev. They wanted to arrest him. They wanted him to be eliminated, but interestingly, it was Boris Yeltsin who was the president of one of the republics, which was the Russian Republic. He protected Gorbachev and he helped him. So the president of the Russian Republic helped the president of the Soviet Union in this revolt that members of his government organized against him, because they were looking at the consequences of his movement. But regardless of the reaction against Gorbachev, eventually, the republics began to separate, and something totally unexpected happened, that the Soviet Union disappeared. And then, because Mikhail Gorbachev was the president of the Soviet Union, then he ended up without a job. So the immediate result of that is that there is no longer a Cold War. And it is no longer a Cold War because of the policies of Mikhail Gorbachev. If we go one step further, what is the ultimate consequence of the end of the Cold War? That if there is no Soviet Union anymore, then there is only one superpower that remains. And that was something that the world did not like. There is an excerpt in your textbook of the book Perestroika, and here it's a little quote of him. For the first time in history, basing international politics on moral and ethical norms has become a vital requirement. What Gorbachev sees is the entire world, and he sees that it's a world full of poverty, of misery, of illness, of so many problems, and the big, powerful countries are still thinking of war, and they are still building and rebuilding a nuclear weapons arsenal. And he realizes that that is totally irrational. And he says in his book, and he explains why, a nuclear war would destroy the entire world. But there is even something more important. Nuclear war, everyone agrees that is irrational, would destroy the entire human population of the world. But even regular, traditional, conventional war, because technology has advanced so much, normal wars are so deadly that we need to change the way we look at relations among the countries. And also, when he is looking at the entire world, and he looks at what Stalin did in Eastern Europe and how he imposed those pro-Soviet regimes, he says this is wrong. No one has the right to impose anything on anybody. So he says, I am going to allow the Eastern European countries to do what they think they should do for themselves. So it is a total change in the attitude that for 45 years had existed during the Cold War. Both the United States and the Soviet Union trying to impose their views, their lifestyle, their ideology on the world. And now we have one person that says, that's it. This is wrong, and I'm not going to allow that. And as soon as he announced that there would not be any retaliation against the Eastern European countries who wanted to change, they all decided to change. And during this time, the Berlin Wall fell, the two Germanys became united, and he decided to end the arms race that had become so crazy, he decided to end all that.